is Spectrum.
Alternative medicine, homeopathy, secret society, hypnosis, the paranormal, alternative energy, UFO, abduction, the weird, the wild, and the wonderful.
With your hosts, Tom Theophanis and Scott Jordan.
Hello, good evening, welcome to the Spectrum Radio Network on BBS Radio 2. I'm Scott Jordan, and remember, there's no such thing as too much information. Well, we're going to be doing a special interview before our interview with Ed Fouche with Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan's got some interesting news, some exciting news, something he's going to be doing. And I'd just like to bring on Richard to get him to talk about it. Richard Dolan, welcome.
Hi, Scott. It's great to be on your show. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got a new project you're starting. It looks like you're starting it soon, so if you could tell us about that.
Gladly. I'm doing something that actually I think I've been wanting to do, I'm thinking about doing for many years, and that's having my own radio show. It's internet radio. And that will actually be starting this coming Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. It's a 3-hour show, so it goes from 8 to 11 every Saturday night Eastern Time. I'm calling it Truth Out Radio Live with Richard Dolan, and there's a couple of things about this show that I think will be a little bit different than most other shows, particularly those in the alternative or even paranormal type of radio community. One, it's 3 hours. It's not a 2-hour, but a 3-hour show, so it's a little longer. The other thing is that really it's going to be something that I will probably have guests on from time to time. I tell you that that's not ever going to be the primary focus of this show. It's really my opportunity to do my thing once a week. Give me the chance to talk about items that are interesting to me, whether they're regarding UFO research, UFO events, or non-UFO related things, just having to do with politics or anything else that really suits my fancy. It's going to be a very personalized kind of a show, and a little bit will be very structured, but some of it will be just going on the fly, and we'll see how that works out.
Okay.
The other thing I should mention is we've got it set up. This is with the Global Radio Alliance. This is a very new sort of network, and I'm really excited to be with these guys, but we've got it set up that we'll have a nice toll-free number, so we'll be able to take call-ins. Maybe not the first show. We're actually just hustling to get everything together, but that really will be the norm, and I am hoping that we'll be able to get lots of callers, that it'll be kind of a nice community that develops between myself and the people listening into the show.
Okay, you're going to have call-ins. Are you also going to have like a chat feature where people can come on and do text chat?
Yes, absolutely. We've got a nice chat room already good to go. And all of this will be through globalradio.com. I'll have links from my sites, and I'm sure the word eventually will get out from wherever. But we got the chat room good. We've got a really good chat moderator, a lady who's had a lot of experience previously doing this, I'm told. So I've got some very good feelings about it. I want a show that's very interactive with listeners. At the same time, I want to be able to have a show that will give me a chance to have my own little platform, my own little soapbox, so I can get my own little happy rants out there from time to time.
Yeah, that's great.
Why not?
Yeah, it's great.
I've done so many radio interviews over the years. And, honestly, it's at the point where I think that I'm a pretty easy guy for most people to interview. This is the impression that I get. That's what I'm told. Really, just you wind me up and I'll just go. I can just go. And I could go, Scott, for 3 hours. I could go for 5 hours if I really needed to. But thank God I don't want to do that to people. So if we have a 3-hour show once a week, I think that'll be quite sufficient.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that you're going to have in this situation is that I've noticed you're a comprehensive thinker. And by that I mean you can go after any subject and have a good, knowledgeable opinion on it. And because you're not just Richard Dolan, the UFO guy, you are that. But having talked to you, I know that you know a great deal about a lot of other subjects. So this, I think, is gonna be very beneficial.
Well, thank you so much for that. I will say I've spent my entire life as a student of many, many different things, and long before I studied UFOs, I was a very serious student of history in a variety of subjects. I did a lot of European history, German and Russian history, U.S. history, U.S. diplomatic history, and in the last decade, I've studied the whole gamut of ancient history. I've just got a very strong interest in science. I am not a scientist by any means, but I certainly read many science books, and I like to think that I'm up to date on many of the current issues in science and technology and everything else that's out there. I have a very inquisitive, curious type of mind. I hope that I never lose that. I turned 50 years old this summer, Scott. I look back on my life and I think this type of an endeavor where I get a chance to just talk with people about matters that are of interest to me, I think really could be a good opportunity. It could work. I've had a number of people giving me very positive feedback on this idea for a show, and I'm hopeful that it'll get off to a good start, and that it'll get only better every week. I'm sure there's going to be bumps along the way.
I'm sure it'll be it'll be fine.
Things I haven't expected. There's always something that you don't expect that comes up and throws a wrench in there. But I have a very good sense of optimism about this show, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. It's Global Radio Alliance. Two gentlemen starting it up, Race Hobbs and Royce Fitzgerald, both in Arkansas. Really great guys. I met Race a little over about a year ago at a conference where I was speaking. In fact, that was at the Ozark UFO conference. Very much hit it off with him and his lovely wife, Robin, and got to know Royce as well. I like what they have to do. I like what they have to say about this show. And again, they just offered me the opportunity to do it, and I thought, perfect. I'll do it on two conditions, I said. One is that I get a 3-hour show, and two, that I simply have full reign about how this show will be in terms of the format, and that's what it is.
Okay. Are you going to be having commercials, or is it just going to be 3 hours of Richard?
Thankfully, there will be some break time.
Okay. I mean, sometimes when a comprehensive thinker gets going, gets rolling, right, you don't want to stop them. You just, you got to be careful with that.
That's nice. There will be breaks. I think, certainly there'll be a break at the top of the hour. That'll be, I think, something like close to 10 minutes or seven minutes, I think they said. I don't even know, actually. It's like a 7 or 8 or 9 minute break. And there'll be two other sets of breaks, I think 20 minutes and at 40 minutes or roughly thereabouts. There'll be breaks. They want to get commercial.
So many years of radio. Of course, you've done so many years of radio that breaks are something that you're very used to. You're used to sort of looping what you need to say into a time frame.
Oh, well, yes, that's something you learn. I learned that more, to be honest with you, from doing video interviews than anything else. I think it was 5 years ago. God, it's going back in time. I did a television show for the Sci-Fi Network called Sci-Fi Investigates. I learned a lot on that experience, I will tell you, because really there was an NBC-produced show, and they flew me around the country. Had a lot of good food that summer, I recall, all on NBC's time. Drank my share of margaritas as well. But one thing that they really emphasize is the importance of being able to say what you have to say as concisely as possible. And, when you're doing radio, it's really the same thing. You can wax poetic, I suppose, and get off on various tangents, but you've got to be able to wrap it up when you get down to that break time.
Yeah, you can't go too far off into a tangent because you only have limited time before you need to loop out and come to a conclusion, or at least answer the question.
Well, the other thing is I think of speaking as I think about writing, which is that readers have limited time. I don't want to waste someone's time with a whole wad of BS if they've got other things to do. So you have X amount of words that you need to use to make your point. And with speaking, really it's the same thing. You've got a certain amount of time to make your point. Make your point. Let's get to it. That's always been my way anyway. So I don't think it's going to be any different on this show.
Okay. Are you going to be, you're going to be talking about UFOs. This is an excellent opportunity for people that have read your books, and maybe they have some questions that they would want answered, that they could call in and they could say, Richard, I read your book and there was this point here. Could you expand on that a little so it'd be a good opportunity for people like that?
Sure. Absolutely. I'll talk about as many UFO cases as is interesting. I don't ever want the show to be tedious. We'll talk about sightings. I'll talk about current news. I'll talk about state of UFO research or alternative community research, which I think in my last interview with you, that was certainly something that we touched on, and that remains an interest of mine, as well as basic political type issues, things that are going on with the developing national security empire that is the United States, that is the nascent world government, new world order, whatever we want to call it. All of these are concerns of mine. All of these will be things that will be coming up, I'm sure, on a weekly basis.
All right. Okay. Well, look forward to it, guys. It looks like it's coming this Saturday. That's March 31st will be his first show. And what time is your start time?
It'll be 8 o'clock Eastern, and that'll go for 3 hours. So it'll be from 8 to 11 Eastern time. And again, that will be with the Global Radio Alliance. The name of my show is now, I've just named it, it's called Truth Out Radio. And I guess the best link, though, would be globalradioalliance.com.
Okay. Anybody who wants to check out the link to Richard's show, Richard's radio show, they can go to the upcoming guest section. Tomorrow they'll be able to go to the archives section. Just click on the link that I will provide in there. That'll take you right to the site where he's going to have his show. It's this Saturday night, March 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern. Of course, I'm sure you're going to have to put all of the time zones in there on your website. Hey,
yes.
Richard, you're going to have to put all the, you have to break it down to all the different time zones, get one for over in Europe and the whole bit.
Well, I suppose. I mean, look, can't people just figure it out? Do the math. Do the math, people.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, that's great. I appreciate talking to you. We'll talk again, Oh,
absolutely. I always enjoy chatting with you, whether on or off the air, to be honest with you. We have fun.
Yeah, I really do. Thank you. And well, that was very interesting talking to Richard Dolan about his upcoming radio show. Right now, though, we have Edgar Fouche, retired U.S. Air Force and defense contractor, with us tonight. He is the author of the book Alien Rapture and a special guest on alienscientist.com forum. Edgar, or Ed as his friends call him, came out and made his first disclosure back in 1998. He was the first one to describe how the TR3B flying triangle, or Astra, and its purpose, as well as other classified aircraft and technology. His sole purpose is to get information out to people, and he is not promoting or selling anything. Hello, Ed.
Yes, hello, Scott.
How you doing? Nice to talk to you.
Well, it's always fun to talk to you.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a bit of your history, your military history, the sort of events that happened leading up to the writing of Alien Rapture, and what got you involved in all of that. So what was it in your past, just as a quick outline for your military history leading up to all of these events? And quite possibly, I remember stories in the book that were of there were younger events involved. The lead character, I would assume, is you.
Yes, I'm Joe Green.
You're Joe Green. Okay. So there is events as a young boy that happened with Joe Green, and so maybe we'll have to go back further.
the story leading up to Joe Green as an adult in the book has a lot of backstory about when he was a child. And I've had a lot of just weird and unexplainable things happen throughout my life, especially growing up. And I really have never talked about it in public until recently on my Be Fearful YouTube channel. I started disclosing these tales because I didn't want to confuse people with my public speaking, talking about black technology and secret programs. And I didn't want to confuse people with thinking, well, he's just another alien nut. And I'm not. I mean, I assume there are aliens. I very strongly assume that. But I didn't want my story about talking about the flying triangle and other vehicles and technology to be confused with strange experiences I had as a child. For example, in the book, I talk about little Joe Green down in Georgia in the early morning hours before sunset out trying to shoot rabbits in the cornfield, and then the sun came up from the wrong direction. There was this huge bright orb, which at the time I assumed was the sun. And then I blacked out, and, right after sunset, my Uncle Junior came looking for me, and I was standing there just staring to the west, and he grabbed me and shook me, and I never did recall exactly what happened. In fact, for many, many years, I had suppressed most of my childhood memories. So when I first started talking to my friends, we met out in Las Vegas in the early 90s, and we were talking about different black programs, and I happened to mention the triangle, and of course every one of them knew about it, and we really were very upset with the government for suppressing technology that would revolutionize energy and make power more available at a cheaper cost, and the flight characteristics of the magnetic field disruptor that would also revolutionize transportation. So they agreed, since I was the only writer in the group, that I would outline the stories and pick their testimony and work it into the book. And they also introduced me to a few of their friends that wouldn't talk over the phone. And back then, we really didn't have hardly any internet. So I would travel around the country and talk to or interview these people. And so we started building the story from that point. And then we got to the point where I had a draft, and I added the backstory. The character Joe Green was the protagonist, the star of the book, so to speak. And
yeah.
So we started adding this backstory of my own personal happenings, because Joe Green is kind of a haunted person that has these visions and interactions with these voices in his head, and these turns out to be aliens, and they're kind of his mentor and bring him through a kind of a transition period. So we ended up having a story put together loosely around 95. And then in 96, I contacted Bob Silverstein, Quicksilver Literary Agency, and he was excited about the book. And he said, well, you're an unknown, so, and you also need a little polish to your book. He says, I'm going to recommend Brad Steigersman, your co-author. Well, back then I didn't care if I gave away half the book to a co-author, because I didn't do it for the money. My sole purpose was to get the information out there.
Right.
And I had talked to several judge, advocate, general lawyers to know exactly, where that gray line was I didn't want to step across. And then their advice was, if I told people it was secondhand information or third-hand, and then I wrote it as fiction, I could pretty damn well write, whatever I wanted.
Right, that's true. So the characters in the book, they're based on, all of the characters in the book are based on people that you know, and these original people that you met and had talked to and were angry about the suppression of the technology that should be out in the public.
Yes, there are a couple exceptions. The background officers, like at Groom Air Base, were fictional. One was General Buharnas, was mostly a composite of Colonel Sullivan, one of the greatest officers I ever served under. The wife and kid were fictional. Agabar, the torturer, was actually a composite of different stories I heard from CIA friends about how they had trained these interrogators for South America and European countries, and in the School of Americas, I believe it was, and other places. So the stories about Agabar, the torturer, although I believe were true, he was not a real person.
Right.
However, the NSA assassin, M.D. Crawford, was a real person. I knew most my adult life from the time I went in the military. His real name was Michael Crawford.
Oh, okay.
And the funny thing about him, he even though he did the dirty work for the agency, I'm sure there were others like him. He's the only one I knew that did that type of work. He thought he was a super patriot, and he felt like somebody's got to do the dirty work.
And when you say that, you mean wet work?
Yes, well...
Assassinations.
Yes. That he felt like somebody, needed to do that to protect America, and he did not see himself as a killer or murderer. He had a job, and he was extremely good at it. Of course, everybody I talked to about him, thought basically he was made up. And then one day after Rebecca and I got married in 96, a guy calls up on the phone. He goes, "Who's this?" And she says, "Well, who's calling?" And he says, "It's none of your business." She says, "Where's Ed?" He says, "Well," she says, "Well, I'm Ed's wife." And he said, "Hell, I didn't know he got remarried." So anyway, Rebecca Brains walks into my study, and I pick up the extension, and I pointed to her to stay on, and we started talking. And then at some point, she realized that M.D. Crawford in the book was the guy I was talking to. And her jaw just literally dropped to the ground, and he wanted a draft of the book. And I got his current address and told him I'd send it to him. And he says, "Did you use my name in the book?" And I said, "No, I used M.D. Crawford." And he says, "Well, I want you to use my real name." And I said, "I can't do that. Lawyers won't let me do that." And I said, "Why on earth would you want somebody to know your real name?" He says, "Because I want my daughters and grandkids to know that I was a patriot." And of course, to me, that was very odd, and his interpretation of what he did. So only recently have I started talking about real names, like Jerry Elric, who was one of my friends that gave me information. He got up a couple years ago. He was 54, I think. Went to the bathroom, died of a heart attack. And then there was Bob Cullen, Allied Signal Bendix, that I first met at Edwards and then Nellis. He was a rep, factory rep, and he gave me information on some of these black programs. And he called me up one afternoon and says, "Ed, I've been having all this numbness and tingling and blurred vision, and I went to the doctor, and I've got a brain tumor on my brain stem, and they can't operate or do chemo." So from the time he started having the symptoms to the night he died, I was the last one that talked to him on the phone before he passed away that night. In less than a month, he was dead. There was also Paige Gray from ITT, based out of Nutley, New Jersey. And same thing happened to him. He was in perfect health. Started getting sicker, went to the hospital, died within a week.
And again, these are characters that you wrote in this book.
They're characters that fed me information, plus I used composites of some of their personalities in the book.
Right, okay.
So, for example, there was a classified dive I was on when I was stationed in Okinawa to retrieve the equipment code books off a sunken Russian trawler, and Russian trawlers were notorious spy ships loaded with radar and intercept and communications equipment. One went down in a storm, and then the NSA satellites tracked it, and we went on a dive and to drop transponders so that once we located it, the submarine could go in there with a deep submersible and start retrieving equipment. Now, the head of the dive team was also in charge of FIBA's, Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service. The NSA always called it Information Service, but it was actually, the NSA name was Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service. And the guy that was in charge there, his name was Rostislav Yukov. Now, in the book, I call him Cherkov, but everything about him was the real Rostislav Yukov, and he was a white Russian defector, I think from either Georgia or Ukraine, and his grandfather was a famous Russian general. And Rostislav was in charge of the dive. And then there's one person, Owen McKeon, on the book, which is actually a composite of two people. One of the people was a CIA friend, and the other person was an SR-71 pilot. So the Owen and McKeon are actually two personalities kind of merged. And then, of course, M.D. Crawford on the dive was Michael Crawford. So, these, like I said, these characters in the book are either composites of people I knew, in a couple of cases, people I heard about. When Joe Green gets to Medina Lake in San Antonio to talk to Dr. Farr, well, the real doctor's name was Parr.
Oh, okay.
Worked at Southwest Research. And he did have a cabin. I've been in it, exactly where we talk about. It's loaded with high-tech equipment. Almost everything that I wrote about, and when Joe Green returned to San Antonio to talk to Farr at Medina Lake, it's almost 100% accurate, except for Crawford showing up as the assassin to kill Dr. Farr. That was the only thing that was made up. I mean, you can actually go out there and look at the same place. It's still there.
Okay, so there was an event in the book. Now, of course, some of the listeners who haven't read Alien Rapture won't understand the characters we're talking about, but everybody who has absolutely will. Just maybe back up a bit and talk about some of the military work that you did, some of the programs that you worked on in the military, and describe your military career, and then we'll sort of shoot back to the book and the characters in it.
In 1967, I was in Kilgore College in East Texas. I graduated from Longview High School near there. In February 67 was the biggest draft month since World War II, and I believe it was like 42,000 people were drafted. I was drafted out of college. I had 5 out of 6 deferments. Back then on the draft, you had a draft board and you had deferments. Like if you were married or had a kid or worked as a defense contractor or when in college making a C or better average. I had 5 of those 6 deferments. The only deferment I didn't have, I wasn't physically or mentally incapacitated. And the rich kids didn't go. So us middle-class kids did. So the deferments did nothing for me. Now, Dick Cheney, I think, had a cyst on his ass, or that was Rush Limbaugh, or, they got deferments for the slightest things.
Man, they had a hangnail. Oh, look, can't go. Sorry.
No, absolutely. So I went in basic training in around June of 67. I had a late enlistment of 3 months. And I volunteer for pararescue. Those guys that jump out of aircraft, helicopters usually to save down pilots. And I busted my ankle at Fort Benning, so I was recycled through Keesler Air Force Base and went to several schools there, airborne communications, navigations, a basic crypto, 16 weeks of advanced electronics, and then after a full year at Keesler, I was my first assignment was Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, and that's where there were two instances that totally changed my career for the rest of my career. One was they had a top secret nuclear tester to be used on the aircraft. The ground crew could use it to test out not only the weapon but the delivery and the control boxes and all that stuff. So this chief and I believe a tech sergeant had totally screwed up the wiring on this modification of the tester, and that was when they first came out with push-pull pins on cannon connectors. And people weren't really familiar with it, so they really stripped out the retainer rings in the connectors. So I had this friend, he was a retired chief, Ted West, was a tech rep, a civilian tech rep, GS-12. And I told him, I said, we can fix this temporarily if you would get approval. So he went to Captain Sullivan, who's the same colonel I talked about earlier. He was a captain at Cannon, and he was AMS commander, Avionics Maintenance Squadron. So what we did is we basically used super glue and lacing string. Now, believe it or not, they actually used to teach a school for lacing. It's where you take that really fine, flat nylon string that you can buy in rolls now, and you would lacing almost like weaving, and we laced up the wires so that the loose ones would be tied to the ones that were in the wires are in there firmly. So we fixed that, and everybody all the way up to the wing commander, Colonel Robert Scott, knew that, this young sergeant at the time had done this. And then towards the end of the middle of my tour at Cannon, I was there a little over 3 years. I went to a crypto school to learn to repair the crypto equipment plus the code boxes. Now, these code boxes are about, I guess about the size of one of those little double-fold cassette holders where it would hold like 3 layers of 4 cassettes. And it had sliders on it that were rods. And the daily codes, you would change the daily codes by putting in the codes, letter A through Z on each rod, and then you'd lock it. So when you went out to the aircraft, you could reset the aircraft that morning that was going to fly that day and put the new codes in it. So when the identification friend from foe, IFF transponders, would query another aircraft, the other aircraft could send back the correct codes, and they would know it was friendly.
Okay.
So I was looking at the maintenance technical order, and it had test codes. It had like a whole page of test codes. There weren't actual codes, but there were test codes so that you could put them in the tester, and it would work, and you could verify the coder was working. So I got this bright idea in my mind to play a trick on the class, and I memorized these 32 codes, and I challenged the instructor. I said, well, I can just make up a code that'll work, and everybody laughed at me and had some derisive comments that weren't very flattering. So I put my code in there, and he plugged it into the tester, and it worked. And he was astounded. And they really thought I had busted the crypto code. So next thing I know, his chief in there from Field Training Detachment was in there, and I had to do it again. And then they called my commander and said, this kid's the most brilliant thing since the wheel. And then that also went all the way up. Rumors went all the way up to the wing commander. So at some point, the NSA guys knew my name.
Right.
And from Canon on, every assignment I ever had, I was either handpicked or I would make phone calls and I would get the assignment I want. And I could pretty much do anything. I was just like gold plated all of a sudden. I was the miracle boy.
Right. Just by that simple trick of memorizing 30 codes. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the first time the NSA came down, which was a couple of months later, this guy, he says, how'd you do it? And I said, I don't know. It was just, by that time I'd got so much attention, I was afraid to tell him I made it up. I mean, I just copied it, memorized it.
Right.
And when I memorized this alpha, 32 alpha codes, I made sentences up.
Okay.
Like A, B, C, D, all boys can do. In other words, I made up several sentences. So when I put the codes in, I just recall the sentences and put the first letter in of each word.
Right.
So this NSA guy, he was very intense, and I told him, I said, well, it seemed logical to me, and it was intuitive. I said, I'm really intuitive, which I was. And he looked at me like, man, I'm not buying this crap at all. But they let it drop, and so from the rest of my career, I was involved in one new system after another. I worked the 3 models of the F-111, the F-15, the F-16, the original B-1, the A-10, all during the heyday of development of these great aircraft. I was on either research and development of the aircraft or the systems on the aircraft or the automatic test equipment that was being built to test the units from the aircraft, like the radar or communications or navigation units. And that all stemmed from those 2 little things I did at Cannon Air Force Base as a sergeant.
How did you eventually end up at Area 51?
After I left Cannon, I went to Mountain Home Air Force Base, and then after 2 years there, I ended up at Edwards Air Force Base. I was originally supposed to be with Tactical Air Command at the Air Force Flight Test Center, doing research and development, flight operational test and evaluation, FOT&E, on the new F-15. But the Air Force Systems Command had a slot for a shop chief of the automatic test equipment, and back then electronics countermeasures was under automatics. And they actually had a little battle over who's going to get me. So AFFTC at Edwards, I got assigned to them.
Okay.
And my boss was a paperclip boy. His name was Franz Dietrich. And he was one of those Germans that they brought over after World War II.
Paperclip, yeah.
And he was there his whole career, I think, until he either died or retired. And we at Edwards, we did a lot of fun things, like we prepped the Streak Eagle, which broke 8 time to climb records. Now, the F-15 was the first jet aircraft that had more thrust than weight. So the damn thing could actually accelerate going straight up like a rocket.
Wow.
And I pulled lots of different PDYs for different companies that were developing avionics units or test equipment for the avionics units. And then when I left Edwards after 3 years, we took all our equipment test stations and moved them to Nellis Air Force Base. Now, that's how I got to Nellis, which has a huge Nellis range that Area 51's part of. So I was involved in a lot of electronic countermeasures and satellite stuff while I was at Nellis. And then at some point, I had this friend, let me back up just there, I had this friend, Dave, Senior Master Sergeant Dave Cassing at Edwards, and he was in charge of all the enlisted people at Groom Air Base.
Right.
And he was in Detachment 3. And a lot of people don't know that Air Force Flight Test Center, FFTC Detachment 3, runs the actual operations at Groom Air Base, Area 51. So the whole time I was at Nellis, he kept trying to get me out there full time at Groom, and I had no interest. I was having a lot of fun traveling and learning new stuff, and I had no interest in being stuck out there in the high desert, all week long.
But you're enjoying doing what you were doing.
Oh, absolutely. So at one point, I got a phone call from Wing Commander's office. It was a lieutenant colonel, I believe, and he said, "I need you to report to this building or whatever." And I believe Cubic, C-U-B-I-C Corporation, was also in that building because I saw some of their flight simulators and stuff that was very interesting. So anyway, this lieutenant colonel says, "We need you to go up to a base in the desert and work on some equipment." And he asked me, he says, "Are you qualified on this unit and this unit?" And I said, yes. And he says, "According to this, you have a top secret Q clearance. So I need you to go up there." And he says, "Do you have any reason you can't go?" Well, I said, "No, sir." I said, "How long?" He says, "As long as it takes." So I reported in at, I think it was 4:30 in the morning. We got on this blacking out bus, and we drove from Nellis all the way up Green Air Base. And once you get off the highway there around Indian Springs, depending on which way you go in, it's pretty much improved gravel roads.
Right.
Not once you get above Indian Springs and Mercury, it's like I said, it's just all gravel roads. So we're going with this bus, and that fine sand and silt would come to leak through the window. So it's like, the air wasn't that good. I'll just put it that way.
Okay.
And we couldn't see anything. And there was a guy with an M16 that checked our ID cards when we got on the bus, and he was sitting in the front seat, turned sideways. And we were told to shut up, sit down. And we shut up and sat down.
Right.
And I could tell there's probably a lot of people that never been there like me. I don't know, that was just instinctive because, they were trying to see out the front. You could see them keep looking at the front of the bus, trying to see out the front window. And so we got there right before daylight, and we were escorted. There was 4 or 5 military policemen with M16s, and there were several of us going to the avionics and electronics building, and they had us put on these black welder's goggles. I mean, that's as close as I can describe them. And you can only see 50, 60, 70 feet in front of you, and then it got blurred. I don't know if there was some kind of polarization or how they did it, but I'm such a big guy, I had such a big head that I kind of just pull it down just a hair, so when I looked down at the ground, I could look over them and I could see around me.
Ah, tricky.
Yeah, well, I could have got shot, I guess, but I mean, my curiosity is just, curiosity killed the cat. So
yeah,
I went into this building, and I was told that I couldn't leave the room. I had to ring a buzzer if I needed help or if I needed to leave the room. So I sorted out. I was looking at the data sheets and the history logs and some of the problems they had with one of the pieces of a crypto, and it was hooked up to a satellite uplink with docile, direct orbital communication link, which was strange to me because it wasn't satellite frequencies or typical coding we would use to transmit or receive information from a satellite. And it led me to believe, after looking at the circuitry and spectrum analyzer and everything else, that they were actually communicating with some kind of vehicle.
Oh, okay.
That could you could tell with the equipment if the vehicle was moving away or closer. It's like, radar signals that measure the lapse between two pulses, and they can tell, distance of aircraft. It's very basic stuff. And then when I got into the computer, there was a clock frequency that's like 1 gigahertz, which was just astounding to me because back then.
When was back then? What was the time frame?
I believe it was 77, summer. Did you use 77 or 79? I was up there several times. Actually, I think it was 79. So anyway, this is a couple years before the Apple came out, and its clock rate was only 1 megahertz, a million hertz. But a gigahertz is 1,000 times faster than 1 megahertz.
Right.
So the NSA had a computer, a huge couple of bays, had a computer that had a clock speed of 1 gigahertz. Now, we didn't see 1 gigahertz processor until not the 486, it was the first, it was after the 486. What was that?
Before we seen a gigahertz? Oh, that's...
Well, no, the 486s, and then they came out with the Pentium 1, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was 1 gigahertz, and that wasn't until, 97 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, 20 years later before the commercials caught up with it. Now, you ask anybody that's ever worked on sophisticated equipment for the NSA, and they'll tell you, which I totally believe, that the National Security Agency's equipment is 20, 30 years ahead of what the public knows.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, anyway, I was working on this stuff, and I needed to get to the other end of the computer cables, which went through a wall to another room. So I rang the buzzer. The guy outside with the M16 opened the door, and I said, I need to go over here and test that cable out. He said, you can't do it. I said, well, hell, the equipment's hooked together. It must be similar. And I said, that's where all the computer information is coming from. He said, write down what you need. I'll give it to them, and they can test it, and they'll write you back. When I could have just walked in the next door of the next large area,
Right.
So, anyway, we got everything resolved, repaired the equipment, and then the other problems came up, and I was there several days, went back the next week, and the only reason I actually ended up there the first time was because the guy that repaired the equipment had a death in the family and went on emergency leave, and they had nobody else up there qualified with the clearances that I had.
Right.
So when they called back Detachment 3 saying, hey, we need a replacement for this guy, and Detachment 3 said, well, we don't have anybody right now. And then that's when Dave Cassing, Senior Marshal Dave Cassing at Detachment 3 at Edwards, said, I know a guy at Nellis that I believe is qualified on that. And that's how my name got picked.
Right, okay. So okay, go ahead.
So basically, I had, first time I ever saw the Flying Triangle was at Edwards Air Force Base with Jerry Ellerick, and we were on top of the Fairchild A-10 hangar where they were doing research and development on the A-10 Warthog. And it was about, I guess, around midnight.
Now, just to be clear, when you say the Flying Triangle, you mean what's commonly referred to as the TR3B, that flying triangle that's thought to be alien technology.
Yes.
But
yes.
But this is a version made by humans, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, originally it was called the TR3B Astra, but obviously once they get out of testing and go operational, they always change the names of these black aircraft. And the Flying Triangle is not an aircraft; it's a platform. In other words, it's a flying platform. There is a difference.
Okay.
We'll get into that. But I wasn't a science fiction fan that much, and never believed in UFOs, even though I'd heard stories, throughout my Air Force career. So we're on top of this hangar. It's about midnight, and my buddy Jerry points up. And he says, "Hey, look up there." I said, "Where?" And he kept pointing around. I see. He says, "There's three triangular lights, and they're getting bigger." And I looked. I said, for a while, I'm saying, I don't think so. And then, they slowly got bigger and bigger. This triangle expanded. So the only conclusion we could come to, it was coming closer or coming down in altitude. So finally, this thing got to where it was the size of the moon. I don't know the actual distance. I'm guessing maybe 10,000 feet or something like that. And then all of a sudden, this thing just, it took off so fast to the north from Edwards, which had been towards northeast, whatever, towards Nevada. I mean, it's like it jumped, and then it went so fast it just disappeared. So we thought it was some kind of probably classified aircraft, and it never entered our minds it was UFO. Neither one of them said, "Oh, look at that UFO."
Right.
Because you see all kinds of strange things out in the desert between Edwards and Nellis and Groom Air Base, because there's just a lot of weird stuff up there flying.
Right.
So the second time, we were on our motorcycles, Brian and Jerry and Ray and a couple other kids. I don't remember their names. And it was right at sunset. And all of a sudden, this huge shadow comes over. It's like a cloud, a dark cloud will go over you. You see a shadow on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody hollered, "Look up!" And we looked up, and there was just this massive triangle and sky above us, and it was leaving a shadow on the ground, and it just scooted through the air. I mean, there was no sound, no vibration, no hum that I felt. It disappeared over the next mountain or hill or whatever, and that was it. So Jerry and I had started talking, and we speculated that it was the same thing we had seen at Edwards that night. So it wasn't until I was at Groom, the last time I was at Groom Air Base, Area 51, it was in the evening. No, I mean, it was still light, but it was getting later in the day. And I saw one sitting on the ramp. And my guess is it was the prototype model that was only 200 feet wide.
Okay.
But, I mean, it's like looking at a battleship and saying, somebody telling you, "Oh, that thing can fly." I mean,
right.
Your mind cannot compute that something that's shaped like a Vicks cough drop that's that thick and heavy looking could fly.
Right. And
so,
was it just sitting there parked?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did they how did you get an eyeful of that? I mean, did they let you go over to it, or?
No. I was looking over the top of my glasses.
Oh, the glasses that you had to wear. Okay.
Outside, yeah. Now, when they have classified flights, they're posted. You get a data sheet every day saying, they'll say flight X102 or something, 12 noon. And most of the testing is done at night. So people can't see from the faraway mountains what's really going on. And then they have these huge lights they turn on facing the mountains. So if you're trying to, take pictures of some, it's almost impossible.
Right, that would make it difficult.
Actually, I have a picture Buddy took at Groom Air Base of the early F-117, and they call them fog lights, but there's these big, huge, round spotlights they pointed out towards the mountains. And on our website, Alien Scientists forum, AlienScientist.com forum, under my special guest, you can go through there and you can actually see that F-117 with the huge bright lights. So by that time, rumors were getting out, before I left for Okinawa, about these strange triangles being sighted. Right. And this was long before the media caught wind of it. I mean, I believe it wasn't until 1988 that there was the Belgian triangle flap.
That's true. Yeah, okay.
So I had actually been told by my colonel that I could have stayed at Nellis and pulled TDY trips up to Groom Air Base. They liked my work. And, of course, my buddy Dave Cassing gave me glowing reviews for my work at Detachment 3, which is Groom Air Base. But I was ready to get out of there. My wife and I had just split up. We're getting a divorce, and I basically wanted to head to the hills, and the farthest hills were Okinawa.
Ah, okay, so you went out to Okinawa.
So I went and picked cadre again to Okinawa to field the F-15s in Okinawa, Japan. And later on, I would be transferred to field the F-16. I ended up as deputy superintendent with hundreds of people working for me, and my boss was Oscar Seifert. He's retired Air Force now, too. So that was interesting. That's where the trawler experience happened, and a couple other things I'll probably go into at some later point.
Actually, yeah, no, I'm going to ask you about that, because that was a very interesting point of the book. The character was out in the sea doing a dive. I think it was a recovery mission, and the character Joe Green seen a bright light. Now, I'm sure there's more to the story, obviously.
Yes, like I had mentioned earlier, Rostislav Yukov was the head of the team, and we had a large French maritime boat. Our equipment was European, down to our European underwear. So if we got caught, we'd have deniability that we were U.S. military. In fact, if we got caught or picked up by the Russians, we were on our own. Now, obviously, Rostislav and the crew spoke Russian. And the rest of us knew, like, hi, yes, no. I mean, we were given a real short course and just very, very, maybe 40 or 50 Russian words. That was it.
Yeah.
So if, somebody asked us a question, we could nod and keep on working and go, yeah, or, whatever. And so we're out on this boat in the East China Sea, and National Security Agency had coordinates of where they believed the Russian trawler sank. So we had these grids, and we were dropped off about a mile apart in a triangular grid. And we'd go down with our transponders to about 100 feet. And if we got a lock-on signal, we would drop the transponders. So like I said, when a deep submersible or American submarine came up, they could pick up the signal from the transponder sitting hopefully near the down trawler. So my first two coordinates, I didn't get a lock on. And on my third coordinates, after resetting my unit once or twice, I got a lock on. But the basic story is that I had the wrong colored light, and when I dropped my transponder, that light was still there. And if I put my hand over it, I could still see the light. And then I started thinking, well, either I've got nitrogen narcosis, Rapture of the Deep, or I was hallucinating. It just made no sense to me. And all of a sudden, I looked at my depth gauge, and I was down 200 feet, which was deadly for a long period of time, and equipment we had. I mean, I was wearing old-fashioned twin 80s.
Okay.
Air tanks. And so I kept getting sucked down to the bottom of the ocean, and I dropped my lead weight belt, and I should have started floating up, and I didn't. And I kept going deeper, and I pulled the CO2 cartridges on my buoyancy compensator, which has shot me up fairly fast. I would have ended up with the bends and then have to decompress me, which they couldn't have done because we didn't have decompression unit on our boat because, you know, if we got pulled over by the Russians and boarded, how do you explain that?
Right.
So either way, I knew I was just totally screwed and would probably die. So the deeper I got, I started this light that was tracking me, staying right in front of me all the time, took off and merged with this huge grouping of other lights. And they strobed and flared up a couple of times. It lit up the whole bottom of the ocean. And next thing I knew, I mean, there was this almost like musical melody in my head, but it sounded like no music I've ever heard before. I mean, it was just euphoric type music. And next thing I know, I had blacking out.
Now, how far down do you figure you were at this point?
My last recognition was over 200 feet.
Okay.
And luckily, the ocean around there is kind of on a plateau. It's not as deep like as a deep trench or something like that ocean.
Right.
So they were supposed to have pulled out by nightfall, but they kept looking for me and decided to stay to daybreak and then pull out in case, you know, my body floated top or something like that. So as they were giving the orders, as Rostov was giving the orders, turn around and head back to Naha Port on Okinawa, southern Okinawa Island, Mike screamed something and dove in the water. And everybody watching him didn't know what the hell he was doing, and then they could see in a distance there was a body floating on the water face up. And my buoyancy compensator was inflated, which kept me on my back. So he grabbed me and started pulling me, swim back towards the boat. And the boat made a turn to get closer to cut the distance in half. And he said I was just talking gibberish, that talking about this light.
Oh, okay.
So they pulled me on the boat, took off towards Okinawa. And then Owen McKeon were basically cursing me for screwing up the mission and this and that. And the weirdest thing of all is my tanks were totally full.
Your air tanks?
Yes.
Now, how the hell can...
It's impossible. Because it's at the point of my last memory being underwater, my gauges showed that I was on the last bit of my reserve air. Before any of this started happening, I'd already made 2 coordinates down 100 feet. I was perfectly clear-headed, clear-minded. I was watching my depth gauge, watching my air gauge, and but something happened, something just really odd and strange. Now, years later, which I'm still trying to track down, I've got a little information, that there was a UFO that crashed in the same area.
Oh, okay.
And one of my friends, that shall remain anonymous because he's still alive, thank God, but I call him Dale, said that you weren't there to retrieve a Russian trawler. You were there to lock on to the metal of the saucer.
Oh, that's interesting.
So our transponders actually had some kind of mass or metal detector or something in them, and we thought they were just regular radio transponders.
And like you said, yours did lock on.
Yes.
Now, that's interesting. How could you be at that depth with having already been to 2 coordinates and going to the 3rd and being sucked down to that depth? Would you, I don't see how you could possibly make it to the surface with that little air.
Oh, I could have probably made it to the surface, but I'd had to go up so fast. But on the other hand, my buoyancy compensation wouldn't work, which is impossible because that's like inflating a small inner tube underwater. It's going to push you up fairly fast.
And you continue to go down.
I continue to go down. So even if I'd have made it to the top, even if I'd had oxygen, I would have had to bend so bad with all that nitrogen in my blood, it would have killed me because there was no decompression chamber.
Right, because you were on a sort of a undercover recovery mission and
exactly
didn't have any identifying labels on your outfits that, you know.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's an interesting event. So where would you go from there? You had that in Okinawa, and you had that event happening. What happened after that? Any events that you would consider strange after that?
Well, right after that, I caught a case of double pleurisy, which is the inflammation of the lining of the outside the lungs, I believe. And I was in the hospital for a week, and even women that have pleurisy will tell you it's many times worse than giving birth. It's horrendous pain. So I got out of the hospital, and about 3 days later, I was back in the hospital with double pneumonia.
Wow.
And I was so sick they couldn't even airlift me to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii to their regional hospital. So I was in there a couple of weeks, almost died. And then after that, I came down with a Ebola-like conjunctivitis. And my eyes turned purple, green, yellow, and they literally looked like prunes. They were so wrinkled.
So the hits, they just kept on coming.
Well, the doctor said, well, you probably got something from the ocean because I told him, I said, I've been diving. Of course, I did dive all the time, but I didn't tell him anything about the story, but I just said, I've been diving a lot. And they said, well, there's all kinds of organisms in the water. So, like I said, I had pleurisy and then pneumonia, probably because at some point I was dying of oxygen deprivation, which might have, screwed up my lungs or more conducive to an infection. And then when I got the conjunctivitis, I was legally blind for about a month. I was on quarters, and I had my roommates go out and buy every Japanese and Chinese herbal medicine, for that kind of stuff. And I was taking all these mushrooms and dried leaves crushed up and everything in the world. And eventually my eyesight started returning, and they told me, he says, there's only a 20% or less chance that you will ever have good vision again, because I had all this scarring in my eyes.
Right.
And eventually it cleared up, and over the years, which is impossible, the scarring has almost completely gone. It's barely detectable. In fact, I've had the same eye prescription for 20 years now.
I wonder if that had something to do with your quick thinking and getting your friends to go out and getting you a whole bunch of herbal remedies and.
Oh, I believe in that stuff. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that was smart, especially for that time frame to have the foresight to do that.
Well, I started taking all kinds of supplements, vitamins, minerals, stuff like that, all the way back in the early 70s, because I used to watch this TV program with Adele Davis on it. She was like the first bestseller talking about vitamins and benefits of vitamins, minerals, and other herbal supplements.
Okay, so you were educating yourself in that stuff.
Yes, I was an advocate like you are.
I am, big time. Alternative health remedies, I'm big into that. Okay, I actually have a guest with us here today. A friend of mine, Charles, from the Nexus2012.info forum, and he's read your book multiple times, just as I have, and just to, throw some flavor into the interview, I'm going to have him ask some questions. Charles, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Is there any questions about the book or his military history that you'd be interested in asking him?
Yeah, actually, the bit about the dive, that really was unusual. I spent a little time diving myself, and I know what he's talking about when he talks about, it's you want to pop up to the top, and it's unusual to have yourself be sucked down like that. In retrospect, do you think there might have been something there physically drawing you down?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was panicking at several points to where, I was kicking my legs, and I had the extended flippers on, which we use for ocean dives as opposed to like lake dives. I was whaling in every direction and wasn't going anywhere but down. And I'd pull both my CO2 cartridges on my buoyancy compensator, and they inflated. And I kept going down, which is it had to have been obviously some very strong force that was pulling me down to the bottom. For what purpose, I don't know.
And you've never been able to recall what happened during the time when you blacked out and your buddy pulled you out of the water?
No, I just have little flashes like these lights were trying to communicate with me, or whatever was behind the lights. Just little flashes.
Okay, but nothing solid. No recalled memories of.
No.
Okay.
At some point, I also want to discuss my more of my military career, but I'm interested to see what Charles has next.
Yeah, me too. Charles, go ahead. Do you have another question?
Oh, yeah, I've got loads of them. Can I jump to one of the characters in the book?
Of course.
Okay. Now, you said that Agavar was a composite, like a compilation of many different characters. He was obviously dangerous to the people that he interrogated, but this character in your book, he seemed to be dangerous to anybody that was near him. How often do you guys have this used?
It was you have to be a sociopath and a psychopath to do what he did.
Right.
Normal people could never do that. In other words, you have to be that type of person. And of course, the CIA and the NSA, they screen everybody. For example, one of the most used tests is the MMPI, Minnesota Multiple Personality Inventory, which is like 500 questions. And it's very accurate for picking out deviations in personality of these type people. So he obviously had what it took. Now, from what I understand, there were quite a number of these people trained by the CIA that were trained for different dictators that we supported. So it always struck me as funny that we badmouth all these communist leaders, yet we turn around and train murderous interrogators for our allies.
Right. So he was a nasty character.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
He was one of those kind of people you read about. It's like, I want to strangle him. I just want to take him out right now. He's just way too dangerous.
Yeah, there was people around that character with guns, and I was sort of hoping at any point one of them would just take their gun out and shoot him.
Yeah.
No, he's right there. Come on, just go ahead. Just do it, Yeah, he was a horrible, horrible character. Any other questions, Charles?
How do they control somebody like that? Or is there just absolutely no way to control somebody like that?
Well, as long as they're doing their job and getting results, they're pretty much left alone as long as they don't screw with other people. But they are loose cannons, You can't train somebody to slice and dice and electrocute people strapped down to a table or a chair without knowing that they are psychopaths.
Yeah.